radical left, the Marxists.
Welcome to The Fire Rises, a mod where the motto is, the world is scary right now, but it's gonna get way worse. The mod starts off in 2020, right before the coronavirus becomes widespread, a mere 4 years ago. So I'm gonna get started as America, since things are gonna get pretty crazy there, and I wanna buckle in for the ride. If you enjoy this wild journey, remember to subscribe. I'm trying to hit 100,000 subs by Christmas because I want that play button, and if y'all get me there in time, I'm gonna do a mega campaign on the channel. The US's focus tree starts pretty simple. We gotta choose between whether to support Trump or run against him after the State of the Union speech. When the speech comes, it's time to choose my path. Pelosi ripped up Donald's speech, and I pick whether that was cringe or based. And today, we're standing Queen Pelosi. The election is handled through the balance of power system. I gotta pump up Biden's ratings so he'll be guaranteed the election. But soon, the bad times start, with COVID coming to the United States, and we gotta start the lockdowns. The economy gets worse with bad news from Saudi Arabia. COVID hit them, and they're just running the place into the ground, cause they're bored, I guess. So now the world has to deal with an oil crisis. The stock market, well, they aren't taking it very well. Unemployment and poverty was skyrocketing, and of course, I lay the blame on the GOP to bolster Biden's campaign. Things continue to get worse in the summer with news of a black man being killed by police brutality in Richmond, Virginia. This set off civil unrest in the city, which soon spread across the country. Portland was expected because that's what they do for fun over there, but all the major cities in the country, it's not a good look for us. Unlike real life though, the riots and protests led to change. Richmond actually disbands their police force, which is just absolutely insane. What do you mean it's too early to see the results of the Richmond experiment? That place is gonna look like a GTA Online lobby by the end of the week. Radicals are organizing a siege of the White House to protest the Trump administration, but they're just making the Dems look bad, so I have to denounce them. Look, we're already posting enough cringe at this time. We don't need you guys adding to it. Since I didn't let them build up the support they needed, they called off the White House siege. Yeah, I took a hit, but Biden's ratings are looking really solid. Welp, guess I should have expected this since they couldn't make oil. At least the factions were kind enough to leave Mecca out of this. Later on, we get news from New York City that their mayor, Bill de Blasio, was assassinated. And I'm just confused on one thing here. Does everybody in the city hate him? Because why does naming a certain group responsible make them more popular? The election comes, and despite Biden's popularity, there are delays in counting the votes and confirming his victory. Of course, this leads to unrest in the meantime, with people accusing the Dems of meddling with the ballots, but nevertheless, Biden still gets the win. Tensions continue to rise with the leak of the Wisconsin papers, making some damning allegations how Biden and the DNC were resorting to some dirty tactics to beat Bernie in the primary. The Trump campaign is not taking this loss well. Trump continues to double down on the election being rigged and is hoping that the Supreme Court will save him. While Biden is being inaugurated in Washington, D.C., Trump definitely was at his lowest point, and he couldn't sit by and watch the presidency get taken from him. So he gathered his supporters in the military at some location in the Midwest to prepare to take it back with force. My focus tree was extended now to show things I could do in the beginning of Biden's term, which meant it was time to build back better. The Civil War is coming, and I had to prepare myself for it. I got a warning about far-left militias on the West Coast, but how am I supposed to take this report seriously when there is a Muppet Fauci paper clipped onto this? I have to choose who I'll be when the Civil War breaks out, and you got a few choices. I can continue as Biden or pick a splinter, like the communist, the casual racist, the competitive racist, and the professional racist. I can't help but imagine them meeting each other and it just looking like that scene from Wolfenstein 2. We will be riding with Biden though. With the election and COVID going on, I completely forgot that I could intervene in the Saudi civil war. But hey, at least democracy is winning. Bruh, this infrastructure focus has us taking $10 trillion of debt. I'm actually gonna be doubling the national debt in 2 years. Incredible. Once my troops arrive in Saudi Arabia, I gotta secure Mecca and defeat the infamous Arabian insurgent leader, Jonas Taylor. I move to the East Coast to wrap up the royalist troops, and it's time for the Civil War now. The economy is in a worse place than ever before, and many officers in the military aren't returning the president's calls, so it's clear what happens next. We are now called the Union of America for some reason, and while the main factions is us versus Trump's American constitutional government in the Midwest, there are a lot of splinters across the country. Every possible group you can think of is around the country. You got local state governments, libertarian militias, black separatists, leftist rednecks, random city gangs. It's just complete chaos. Fortunately, at the start, the only side I have to focus on is Trump's government. But I have to make sure to leave reserves to guard other parts of the country in case I get jumped by other factions. The Second American Civil War has begun, and Trump's army started with an all-out assault on my lines. A large part of the US Air Force still stayed with me though, so I quickly established air supremacy east of the Mississippi, and Trump was only able to make a small breakthrough in Indiana. Biden has been given an incredible challenge as president, but with his advanced age, he'll only be able to handle his duties as president for so long. So I have a decision category about Biden's health. Over time, the president ain't gonna be looking so hot, and I have to constantly click these decisions to delay it. Trump's opening offensive lost steam, so it was time for Biden to strike back. I wanted to retake Lafayette and cut off a few divisions outside Indianapolis, but after weeks of attacking, these troops really don't want to let go. The plane losses are really crazy though. Someone in the mod really needs to take a look at that. I've lost 100 planes and helicopters to just AA. Eventually, I do bust through and take Lafayette, and I got a really good catch with this pocket. There were 56,000 soldiers captured in that encirclement, and the casualty ratio in the war is looking really embarrassing for Trump. The loss of those quality troops critically weakened their defenses in Illinois, so I concentrated my good units to make a massive breakthrough in that state. They tried to disrupt my momentum with a militia uprising in West Virginia, but this is exactly what I had the reserves for. Since we are the legitimate America, we're getting international support from our allies. The French come in with a seasoned infantry division, and I'm immediately throwing them to the Midwest. With actual soldiers leading the charge, I'm able to get a really big pocket in Illinois, containing so many proper troops that Trump will never be able to launch an offensive again. When the pocket is finished liquidating, there were about 112,000 troops in it, and you can't walk that off. Looking at the total casualties, it just says everything you need to know about this war. You couldn't even publish casualty reports like this in real life. Your own people on your side would be saying you're lying. At this point, I've neutered Trump. Although he still has a lot of divisions on the field, the vast majority of them are just farmers with rifles, and as you've seen, they aren't capable of doing much harm to me. I need to finish securing Illinois, so I encircle the militiamen besieging Chicago and clean up any other unfortunate souls trying to find me in the state. It was way easier to capture them since they don't have actual soldiers anymore, and once this round of pockets is done, it's looking even more embarrassing for Trump. At that point, you just mutiny and end the war, right? I pushed through Wisconsin easily, but I'm starting to hit a wall with supply and can't get past Minnesota without taking Minneapolis, and can't get through Missouri without taking St. Louis. Those are my only two ways to push because for some reason there's no supply hub in Iowa. Like, I know it's called a flyover state, guys, but that doesn't mean there's literally nothing in Iowa. They have a city. I use this slow point to look for things to do and make myself stronger. I haven't really looked at the doctrines yet, so I take a look around to see what they changed and figure out what's good. Okay, I won't lie, that's actually pretty cool. The AI didn't make it easy for me with my low supplies, but I was able to take Minneapolis. But my relief was followed by confusion when I get the news that Muammar Gaddafi's son united North Africa under Gaddafiism. I don't know how he did it, but Guess you gotta hand it to Gaddafi. Maybe we will see the United States of Africa. With a different political UI, I completely missed the military advisors and realized I was missing some very important bonuses that would make this war easier for me. I definitely felt the effect with my next set of attacks. St. Louis was quickly cut off and I stormed the city. With that city secured and Minneapolis, I wasn't stopped by supply anymore, so my motorized divisions raced forward to surround way more of Trump's militia. The sun was setting on MAGA, so I guess that's why the fascists picked now to declare war on me. I didn't have a warning, so I wasn't prepared for this at all. I especially didn't think they'd team up, so I have to deal with the Nazis in Michigan and the fascists in New England. They caught me with my pants down at this point, but that didn't mean I couldn't fight back. I would be lying though if I said the way the Nazis were speeding through my land wasn't scaring me a little bit. The good thing about fighting the fascist militias is that since they are just fascist militias, they aren't well equipped. I got my F-16s doing God's work on them, and unlike Trump's army, they can't shoot back. If anything, the AI hardcore trying to rush me down worked in my favor because they overstretched with their divisions, and I was able to kill off a decent amount of their troops. And this was just with my militia reserves. Once I set in the good infantry that was fighting in the Midwest, it was curtains for the fascists. Pennsylvania was saved, Chicago was liberated, and that opening chaos didn't cost me that many troops. With their opening offensive ending in complete failure, I pushed back with my real infantry and completely bulldozed the fascist lines. Once I drove through all of Michigan, that was enough to convince both groups to surrender to me, which is just really funny. I won so hard that I intimidated the other guy into surrendering. With the distraction dealt with, it was time to clean up the Midwest with the remaining Trumples. Any major cities left in the Trump-aligned states were back in Biden's hands. And with victory certain, I could finally convince the rebels in West Virginia to give up. And soon, the American constitutional government surrendered. My main opponent was gone, and I could focus on reunifying by integrating the states I got and cleaning up the splinter states around me. All the surviving local governments are willing to rejoin the US without a fight, so I got Texas back no problem. But New Mexico had some problem with Latino communists in Arizona, so I had to help take care of that. They were basically a speed bump, and now the state of New Mexico rules over New Mexico and Arizona. The Federal Air Command was holding on to Nevada for me, and I had to save them from the Mormon onslaught. Once again, they were barely a speed bump. Wait a second. Groom Lake? I guess I know where Drake is in this timeline. Now with the Rockies cleaned up, it was time to move to the West Coast. The communists in California looked busy fighting in Oregon, so I was expecting an easy sweep. It was looking like I was right at the start with how easily I swept over Southern California, but the AI responded to me very quick, and despite my troops being veterans, the rough terrain combined with the size of the state made this a lot harder than I initially imagined. I did need to speed this up because 3 years of running the country through the Civil War was taking its toll on Biden. He may be walking around still, but he doesn't know where he is. What really slows me down is sieging LA. It's all urban and mountains around here, so it's super hard to push. And to make things worse, it's as to micro here because you can't even see the provinces with the unit models completely covering them, so you don't know where your units are and what they can and can't attack. I even tried turning off the 3D model sprites in the game options, but that doesn't work, so you still just gotta guess where things are. All these years of warfare has seriously drained the Air Force. Doing cast missions is unsustainable with how good AA is. I can't establish air superiority over California because of the Chinese and North Korean Air Force. Eventually, after months of just wailing on their troops, I finally secure LA and the communists surrender. For some reason, reuniting the country is just too much for certain people in the world, and they start embargoing me. Look, what do they want me to do? Do they just want me to talk down all the fascist rebels around me? Come on guys, cut me some slack. With the eco-fascist gone in the northwest, all that was left was Atomwaffen in the south. Biden's health was on the brink, and although he didn't have much time left, I wanted to make sure he at least saw America reunited. You know, for a hyper-militarized group that's been waiting for a chance to overthrow the federal government, they really suck at fighting me. The communists in LA put up more of a fight than they did. It only took 3 weeks to roll them, and finally, I could declare America united. Biden had done it. After nearly 4 years, he brought the country together as one. With the country back together, it was time to focus on rebuilding and reasserting ourselves in the world. But the world was quick to remind us,
I'm here for money. Money that you borrowed.
Just a little bit over 46 trillion to be exact. I want to work on stabilizing Mexico. It's pretty bleak down there. We have 3 cartel groups and anarchists fighting over the country. The only normal people, and that's a stretch, is the Mormon militia holding this city across the border. And since that's the only remotely sane option left, I start dumping guns on them so they can build up their army and send in the actual army to help them expand. Since they were up in the mountains, I trusted the militia to hold while I got them some more space. The Sinaloa cartel collapsed instantly after I pushed, giving me free rein to push through Baja California, which gave them a huge manpower pool to recruit from, and gave me an airport to send planes to support them from. I took a look around the world to see what else was going on since I was so focused on America. Sadly, China used our instability to take Taiwan. Russia was under some new leadership, Vladimir Zhirinovsky. I don't know what happened to Putin, but my guess is that it wasn't pretty. What is really surprising was that Belgium is just gone, split up by the Netherlands and France with EU rule over Brussels. Who cooked up this partition? This is the worst thing I've seen. Come 2026, Biden is clearly near the end. The stress of the presidency has left him with little time left. At least he can go out happy because he did bring America back from the brink and well on the path for reconstruction. The Mexico operation is going great with the Mormons expanding their army and I'm expanding their territory. Also, a part of Biden's plan to bring back America is to invade Canada. You'd think in his clearly demented state, nobody would take it seriously, but I guess his cabinet just replied, "Say less," and drafted up invasion plans. You may think, but what about NATO? Canada is a part of NATO, shouldn't they protect them? And the answer to that is no, nothing even happened to Canada. Trudeau just pulled them out because he was bored, I guess. Sadly, in August, the nation got horrible news. Joe Biden had died in office. The stress of the office got to him, so Kamala Harris had to finish his term. Soon, Russia begins its invasion of Ukraine. It was not looking good for Zelensky, so I sent some quality infantry divisions to help out. Once I arrived, Ukraine got even better news with NATO triggering Article 5 and getting involved due to a skirmish between Polish and Russian troops on the border. So Russia was gonna have to face off against all of NATO. You'd think the Russians would be toast, but no. The Russian army locked in. My veteran volunteers weren't doing so good now that they actually had to fight against an actual army instead of fascist militias and gangsters. Kiev was looking like it was about to fall, so I tried to save the city, but they just got surrounded in the city with the Ukrainians. It's okay though, it was just a French volunteer division, so I didn't actually lose Americans there. The main reason I'm getting destroyed out here is that I can't reinforce my units. These infantry are supposed to have tanks and AA, but they're not getting there no matter what I do, so I have to recall the volunteers and send them to another country. I cleaned up the last rebels in Mexico and ended their civil war. And I definitely made a good call supporting the Mormons because their first act as leaders was to restore Mexican democracy. Also, you know what, since this was one of Biden's last plans in office, we invaded Canada in honor of him. Nothing personal, Trudeau, it's just what Biden would have wanted. Almost forgot to mention this, but the back in business focus changed to Kamala instead of Biden after he died. I appreciate that attention to detail, that's pretty cool. Now with the end of Canada, it was time to focus my attention back to Europe to save them, because NATO was just falling apart. Ukraine and the Baltics were taken, so as is tradition, America has to clean up Europe's messes. Once I arrived in Poland, I had to get some pressure off of Warsaw. At least now that my divisions were fully equipped, I could properly fight the Russians. Their lines were thin, and with every breakthrough I made, more Russian divisions were cut down. I gave NATO the initiative they needed to get back into western Ukraine and put pressure on Lvov. The Russians tried to stuff the city with more guys, so I simply went around the city. The flat terrain in Ukraine made it so easy to pull off moves like this. Things slowed down after that because supply is rough in these parts, but I couldn't help but notice that since I left the Warsaw area, the Poles were falling apart there. So once again, America had to come over and save the day. I attacked their flanks and got any easy pockets I could get. After a few weeks, all the Russian troops who threatened Warsaw were gone. I don't want to just keep responding to what the Russians do, so I need to make my own moves against them. So from Lvov, I began a push to Kiev. We had pushed the Russians back a lot, but I couldn't take the city because I stood at the edge of the supply network and couldn't break the Russian defenders. I mean, look at what I'm facing in some of these battles. This is why I have to keep doing encirclements, because so many Russian divisions are built like the Juggernaut. While things did slow down in Eastern Europe, it's popping off in Eastern Asia with the Great Asian War. We got China, North Korea, Pakistan, and all the Southeast Asian countries versus Japan, South Korea, India, and all the Oceanic countries. I could get involved, but I want to focus on saving Europe. Once again, I redeploy in the Warsaw area and launch another offensive against the Russians. I focused on moving north to meet up with the NATO troops launching an attack from Kaliningrad. Once we met up, we cut off 8 units that were quickly destroyed by our combined forces. The Russian front lines were really thinning out now. Every offensive was getting easier. I could make bolder moves and not even have to worry about the Russians cutting me off from behind. Lithuania was liberated from the Russians, and the Baltic-Belarusian front was blown wide open. All I had to do was keep driving and more Russians would get encircled and die. I drove southwards to Kiev to finally liberate the city from Russian oppression. Their army was decimated by all the encirclements I did, so I drove into the city without firing a single shot. I helped NATO clean up all the pockets I created, and looking at the front lines now, I demilitarized Russia. My victory was certain now, so I told my troops to drive to Moscow because there was nothing else to do. This ended the war. Russia was forced to give up all its gains and some more. Ukraine, the Baltic states, and Belarus were back on the map, along with a liberated Crimea and many other smaller states in the Caucasus region. With Europe handled, it was time to take a peek at the Asian War, and I was not a fan of how it was going. Looking at how India was doing in its fight against China, they left a lot to be desired. My veterans from Europe arrived to give the Indians some initiative back. However, as I'm trying to push, it really hits me as I'm looking at these battles that the combat in this mod is kind of bad. I know losing a battle because you didn't reinforce sucks, but when you crank up the reinforce chance to 53% so you can't reinforce meme someone, it makes the combat suck a lot more. I'm just forced to stare at these battles go on for weeks longer than they should have because China can keep dumping 10 with 10 org infantry that keeps the battle going. These super grindy battles are made worse with the fact that you can't even make good divisions because the combat width of infantry and tanks were increased for God knows why. See, these tanks are 31 combat width and look at their stats, it's pathetic. 2 months later, I finally get the breakthrough I've been waiting for, and I got to move quickly so the Chinese and Pakistanis don't get back on their feet. I push through their rear and encircle a large army around Jaipur. The pocket is quickly reduced, and the logs report nearly 250,000 troops perished in this offensive. But since I'm fighting China, this is basically a drop in the bucket. The Chinese were launching a huge offensive from Nepal, and I had to stop them. I pivoted to liberate the city of Patna, and with that city back in India's hands, the Chinese offensive was stopped in its tracks with tens of thousands of more Chinese troops cut off. I'm desperately trying to hold off the waves of Chinese troops flooding in from Nepal, and I'm just wondering where the Indian army is. 1.7 billion people in this country, and they can't even get enough men to hold the whole front line. More troubling news comes with the declaration of the Eurasian Union State. I guess after his failed invasion of Ukraine, Zhirinovsky had an unfortunate fall from power.
You are accused of treason and anti-Soviet behavior. The court finds you guilty and sentenced you to be shot.
And of course they got an even worse guy in charge. Dugin has already swallowed up Central Asia. Bro didn't waste any time putting Russia back on the warpath. I'm doing okay playing as a fireman in India. Another Chinese army is cut off in luck now. All these volunteers are veterans, so it takes no time to mop them up, but India continues to struggle against China's alliance. I know China has infinite manpower, but I figured if I keep inflicting massive losses to them like this, their economy won't be able to keep up. I sent volunteers to South Korea, and I stopped a very large naval invasion that the Chinese attempted. Then after that, I had a big breakthrough in Pakistan. Like, my troops never took their foot off the gas pedal after they got that breakthrough. I moved through that country quick, surrounding pockets of soldiers everywhere. I pushed to Islamabad and pivoted to the east to connect with the Indian lines and encircle a huge army. Look at what I caught here. This was well over 500,000 men, not even including all the smaller pockets I got along the way. Korea is not fun to fight in. The super narrow front combined with all the units make the combat super grindy. And you also may have noticed you can't even see the map under all the unit sprites that you still can't turn off. So microing my units is just a guessing game. It took me months of wailing on this part of the front line, but finally I broke through the border. The blitzkrieg could finally start, and I gunned it for Pyongyang. The city fell pretty easy, and with all the backup behind me, I felt like we'd be able to sweep through the North Korean countryside. But as soon as South Korean troops touched the Chinese border, it was looking bad after that. I don't know where Xi summoned all these extra troops from after I killed millions in India and Korea, but I was not ready for their counterattack. The Chinese pushed to the DMZ, isolating me and many other troops away from South Korea and started pounding us to the ground. I knew there was no chance of holding this area, so I just left through the port. But with the amount of troops South Korea and its allies were gonna lose here, I think my offensive just doomed South Korea. When the horde turned its attention south, Seoul got rolled over. They snaked all the way down to the southern coast, and I tried to save things pushing west and cutting them off, but there weren't enough troops anymore to hold the pocket. I sent more volunteers to Japan, and in hindsight, man, I should have sent these earlier, but they fortified a perimeter around Busan to make a final stand. Not gonna lie, it's looking really bleak for the anti-China coalition. I've spent the last year and a half fighting the Chinese, causing millions of casualties, and it doesn't even feel like I've left a mark on Xi. While he's slamming into my guys around Busan, he's reversing all the gains I made in Pakistan, and he's launching a naval invasion of Japan. It wasn't a good feeling watching hours of gameplay reversed in minutes. Look at what I'm up against. I mean, they appear to be lacking a lot of vital equipment, but I'm not seeing it. All I see is that once again, the Indian eastern flank is falling apart and I have to save it, because nobody can do anything here without my help. Case in point, Europe. Dugin rebuilt the entire Russian army in 3 years and started the second Russian invasion of Europe. I'm still trying to focus in Asia in the vain hope that I can slow Xi down, but as the Indian campaign progresses, I'm feeling like I'm Noble 6 on Reach. I check in on Europe and I'm impressed. 3 years to recover and fight against an opponent who had to rebuild everything from scratch, and they did worse. What did Dugin do?
It's bigger. It's better. Ladies and gentlemen, it's too much for Mr. Incredible.
With India being pretty much unwinnable, I sent those divisions to Germany. I had some hope at the beginning since I was able to start with some cheeky encirclement. India, of course, collapsed really fast without me. But Xi didn't even set up a puppet government over India. He just balkanized the country and left. My hope for Europe fell pretty fast as I realized how much better the Russian army was this time around. They had fully mechanized their army with modern equipment and were just bulldozing through Germany. They had way more troops this time too. My 7 volunteers were getting swarmed every time they attacked. The situation was looking really desperate there, so there was only one thing I could do at this point. Leave. Dugin actually did it. Russia is going to control mainland Europe. As for Asia, well, nothing is going to change here. I can keep a hold around Busan indefinitely, but I have no chance of pushing the Chinese out of Japan because the Mon's combat isn't balanced very well. With 40 units in one province, they can keep this battle going until I die of old age. Looks like NATO pieced out though, and I didn't even know Gaddafi was at war with NATO. I don't know who's in for a worse time, Gaddafi's Britain or Dugin's Europe. It's pretty funny that they exiled the British monarchy to a random island in the Indian Ocean. You think Charles III is sitting on Mauritius like... With that, I think I'm done with The Fire Rises. I will say, I think the setting is interesting, and it looks like it has a solid amount of content, but they need to rebalance the combat to make it more enjoyable. I'm not asking for too much, alright? They need to make AA shoot down less planes so you can actually run cast missions for more than a month, reduce the combat width of infantry and tank brigades so you can make good divisions, and nerf reinforced chants in battles. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, remember to leave a like so others will see it too, plus subscribe if you haven't so I can reach 100,000 by Christmas and you get a mega campaign next year. Thank you to my alumni on Patreon going the extra mile to support me and the great content to come. I hope to see y'all next time. Bye bye.